Right now on Upfront.
The race for Wisconsin's Supreme Court intensifying.
And now someone, a serial liar like my opponent.
This guy's extreme and he's corrupt.
This Sunday, 16 days to go. Our new interviews. Former Justice Daniel Kelly, Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasiewicz. The start of early voting just 48 hours away. Then the plan to raise tuition.
This modest tuition increase will help our universities continue to provide students with a world-class education.
The University of Wisconsin system proposing a 5% increase. System President Jay Rothman is here. And the clean energy shift. The new technology and the new insight just this week on how Wisconsin will remain competitive.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and Political Director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. In-person early voting begins Tuesday, the same day the Wisconsin Supreme Court candidates will meet for an afternoon debate, likely the only time ahead of the April 4th election. We invited both Daniel Kelly and Janet Protasiewicz to participate in a live, primetime statewide television debate. Kelly agreed, Protasiewicz declined. So instead, now part of our one-on-one conversations conducted this past week in Milwaukee. First, former Justice Daniel Kelly.
The state's abortion law will likely end up before the Supreme Court. I know that you have received the endorsements of Wisconsin Family Action, Wisconsin Right to Life, as well as Pro-Life Wisconsin. Why should voters think that you would do anything other than uphold the state's 1849 abortion ban?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. One, it's the way I conduct my campaign. I've been talking about the role and the function of the court and how we don't have anything to do with politics or partisan decision making. We just apply the law that already exists.
So is there a scenario where you could rule that the state's current law and the abortion ban is unenforceable?
Sure. I mean, if there's so for example, there's a case currently in the system. It's the one brought by Attorney General Call. And in that case, and I looked at the pleadings once, I don't know if they've changed since then, but when I looked at the pleadings, the argument was that a 1985 law impliedly repealed the 1849 law. And so that will likely work its way to the Supreme Court. Now, the question there before the court will be, was there an implied repeal? If the analysis reveals that the 1985 statute impliedly repealed the 1849 statute, I'll say that.
You've been highly critical of Judge Protasiewicz, your opponent, on the campaign trail, even during this interview, on her sharing her values on the topic of abortion. You have previously expressed some of your opposition to abortion as well in previous writings. How is that any different?
So the difference is this. I know the difference between the court and the legislature, and I'm not sure my opponent does. So if she knew the difference, if she knew the stark difference between lawmaking, which takes place in the legislature, and law adjudicating, which takes place in the court, she wouldn't be talking about her politics. She'd be talking about what the courts do.
Hillary Clinton recently endorsed your opponent, Judge Janet Protasiewicz. Former President Trump endorsed you in 2020. Is he going to endorse you this cycle?
I have no idea.
Have you talked with him since announcing your campaign?
I'm not.
At this point, would you welcome his endorsements?
Well, here's the thing with endorsements. So the endorsements that I look for are those that would establish what a Supreme Court justice properly does, right? So I've been talking, my the whole campaign, frankly, my whole career, talking about what the court properly does, just using the existing law to decide cases that come before the court. So I'll accept any endorsement that advances that idea. I don't know if an endorsement from President Trump would advance that idea.
I want to talk about your work in 2020, hired by the state Republican Party, the Republican Party of Wisconsin, as a private attorney. Former Chairman Andrew Hitt told the January 6th committee he had some pretty extensive conversations with you about the false electors plan. You said it more equated to about 30 minutes and a phone call. I'm curious, though, more broadly, why you agreed to advise the party on a plan to submit false electors claiming to be for President Trump.
Well, so let's back up. So the extensive conversations, I believe he testified, were with his attorneys, plural.
And he mentioned you, yes.
I'm one of them because they were one of my clients. But he went on in the testimony to talk about there's one call that we had on this question, lasted about 30 minutes. Frankly, I was not versed in this area of the law. And as the testimony shows, I was not in the loop. So it was just that one conversation, just a general conversation about the subject, And that was it.
Broadly speaking, is that in the spirit of the Constitution, an effort to overturn election results?
Well, so I've talked about the importance of following the Constitution, especially in electoral matters. And, it's interesting that there are some media reports that are suggesting that I was in the middle of this idea of bringing these alternate slate of electors, when the testimony is I was not even in the loop. Now, the really interesting thing to me is that I've been roundly criticized by some people for not coming out and saying that there's some way of negating the election. So I watched this swirling around out in public, and if it wasn't so important, it'd be amusing. Because, like I said, I mean, having one group of people angry at me because I've not come out and said that you could overturn the election, and then have another group of people come out and say, well, you were advising people on how to do it, it's not true.
Your opponent, Judge Protasiewicz, has said that she will recuse herself from any case involving the Democratic Party of Wisconsin due to the money that they've given to support this campaign. You have not said the same about the Republican Party of Wisconsin. Why not?
Yeah, partly because we're not accepting contributions from the Republican Party the way that she is.
In a recent ad, your opponent implies that you're corrupt, that you can be bought. Can you be bought?
No, absolutely not. And this is, let me just, I appreciate you bringing this up, because this is infuriating, truly infuriating. This is supposed to be a judicial campaign, and now someone, a serial liar like my opponent, comes out and tries to trash my father's legacy. That's appalling, and it's inexcusable.
Now to part of our conversation with Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasiewicz.
The state's abortion law is likely to end up before the Supreme Court. For the first time in its history, Emily's List endorsed a candidate in the state judicial race, which was you. You also got the endorsement from Planned Parenthood. Both organizations want to overturn the state's 1849 abortion ban. Are you a part of that plan?
No, and I have made it very, very clear to everybody who I've talked to that I have personal values. One of my personal values is that a woman should have a right to choose and make her reproductive health care decisions. I hope that I have been equally as clear that I have no predetermined decision on how any case regarding the 1849 ban is going to turn out. When and if that litigation comes in front of our Supreme Court, a fair decision will be made that's rooted in the law and rooted in the Constitution.
Is there a scenario then where you would rule against the argument that the state's ban is unenforceable?
Of course. There's a scenario to rule for it. There's a scenario to rule against it. It's all going to depend on how the issue is framed, how it comes to the court, what the arguments are, what the briefs are, and then a determination will be made.
Have you read any of the briefs or the documents that are currently in Dane County?
I have not.
I know that many judicial candidates don't spend time talking about their values, their political views, because some of these issues, like this abortion law, may be coming before the state Supreme Court. You've been very open about talking about your views, specifically around abortion. Why?
I think it's really critical that the voters understand and know what the values of a candidate is, especially in a race such as this, a statewide Supreme Court race. Why hide behind a filmy little veil or curtain and say you're going to make your decisions based on the law and Constitution? We could all say that.
How much do your values influence your decision making?
My values influence my decision making to an extent, but never crossing the line as to, what the law is, what the Constitution is, and how you interpret a case.
How do you ensure that?
I'll tell you, that's based on what I've just told you. I have been doing that my entire career.
You've called the state's legislative maps rigged before in our conversations and on the campaign trail. You've said you would enjoy taking a fresh look at them, perhaps. Is that a signal to people who don't like the maps to file a lawsuit if you win, and how you would rule on those?
It's not a signal, but it's one of the main issues that people talk to me about when I'm campaigning. The vocal, people's being so vocal about how disturbed they are by our maps is one of the reasons I talk about the maps.
In your mind, does a fair map equate to more Democrats being elected?
I think that what would happen is, yes, I would think fair maps would equate to more Democrats being elected because, look, Wisconsin's a battleground state. Our statewide races are very, very close. Then you take a look at that state assembly. You take a look at that state senate. Almost 2/3 red. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at that and say, yeah, that's fair.
Voters are seeing a lot of television ads in this race. As Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge, reports have indicated at least several instances as judge where you rejected a prosecutor's request for prison time, a stronger penalty than you gave, including cases of sexual assault of a minor. I'm curious why.
I'll tell you this. I have sentenced not hundreds of people, probably not even thousands of people, probably well over 10,000 people. My opponent has sentenced 0 people. So I think it's very, very easy for him, and I'm well aware that the Republican Party of the state of Wisconsin did an open records request. I support open records, but did an open records request for every single case that I have touched as a judge. I would say that certain sentences were cherry-picked. Not all the facts were given. Obviously, not all the facts were given. You know, sentencing hearings can take several hours. They can take half a day. Sometimes they can even take a day. I can tell you that every single case where I sentenced somebody, I was fair. I used my best judgment to come up and fashion a sentence that was going to protect the community, take into account how serious the offense was, along with the character of the offender.
Do you regret any sentences you've handed down?
I'd say this, hindsight's 20/20. So if somebody reoffends, and I have information in front of me indicating and, helping me, fashion a sentence that I think is appropriate, I do that based on the information that I have. If they later reoffend, sometimes they do, I'm not able to tell necessarily who's going to reoffend. Of course, looking back on it, I say, I wish I had known that you were going to reoffend, right? Of course I do.
Your opponent, former Justice Kelly, has said that you are running, quote, the most profoundly dishonest campaign he's ever seen, and called it, another quote, beneath the dignity of a judicial race. Are you running a dishonest campaign?
I'm running a completely, totally 100% honest campaign. I think that my opponent is trying to hide from his extreme views. The public needs to know this guy's extreme and he's corrupt. He is not fit to be on the Supreme Court.
Our thanks to No Studios in downtown Milwaukee for hosting us. Much more of our conversations you won't want to miss Wednesday night, a primetime Wisconsin Supreme Court special at 7 p.m. You can watch live on WISN 12 in Milwaukee or streaming on WISN.com or the 12 News app. Up next, the proposed tuition increase at University of Wisconsin System Schools. UW System President Jay Rothman standing by next.